Hello, Linda.
Good morning. So much for coming in quietly.
Did you know that there's a French Alps? I always thought it was just Swiss Alps. But France has some Alps too. And there's a famous mountain in this range of mountains called the Swiss Alps. And the French call the mountain Mount Blanc. Mount Blanc serves as a permanent challenge to mountain climbers. Did you ever hear the old joke, why do mountain climbers tie themselves together by a rope? So that the sane ones won't leave. So this mountain has a, you know, in these mountains they have these crags where there's these big openings that come down. And in this mountain, there's a crag and it's called Fool's Needle. Sounds appropriate. Fool's Needle is only climbed by those who are experienced. Fool's Needle stands 11,487 feet high. Only the more experienced climbers even attempt to scale its slopes. But some time ago, a young student became trapped on Fool's Needle, and he was there for 3 days and couldn't get off. He was dangling from a narrow ledge. When I say dangling, you know, they just climb up the rock and they're pinned to it. So he was stuck there. He couldn't go any further, couldn't come back. He probably had some people with him who went for help. Well, when they finally found him, they took him to the hospital. The hands were frozen. And he told about this frightful ordeal that he was in. He said, I repeated over and over to myself, I must hold on. I must hold on at any price. There are times in our lives, in this journey that we're on in life, that many of us whisper those desperate words. I must hold on. I must hold on. There was an interesting man in the Old Testament who certainly knew what it was to hold on. His name was Job. Now listen, as the author of the book of this drama describes Job. In the land of Uz, and I'm going to assume it's right here, and they call it Ur. But in the land of Uz was a man named Job. This man was blameless, upright, feared God, and he shunned evil. Now this is an interesting twist right at the beginning of Job's story. This drama takes place in a time when it was assumed that prosperity and good fortune came as a result of righteous living. If you lived as God would have you live, you would be blessed financially, physically, as well as spiritually. Do you agree with that theology? Perhaps you know people who hold on or who hold to that theology. There are many who have this shallow approach to faith even today. There is not, you can't go back and look in the Bible and see where there was any of Jesus' original followers that occupied beautiful homes and ornate mansions, maybe after death, but not while they were alive. And yet, here we are introduced to a man who was chosen to experience unbelievable pain, unbelievable suffering, And the reason he was chosen to experience these tragic circumstances was that he was blameless, he was upright, he feared God, and he shunned evil. He was chosen for that, to experience this, because he was that way. That doesn't seem right, does it? The point of the thing is, why would this happen to him? Why is a big deal in all of our lives? Well, you see, as the story goes, you know it, most of you, God was in a conversation with Satan. Now, why would God talk to Satan? Why would God bring Satan in front of him to talk to him? Well, Satan's an angel. Satan is a creation of God. God created him. So the angels report to God. Satan is an angel. God's having a conversation with him. He's asking Satan, what are you doing, Satan? Satan says, well, I'm going back and forth across the earth. And I noticed your man Job. After God said, hey, have you ever seen my man Job? Oh, yeah, I noticed him. He's upright. He's blameless. He shuns evil. But take away the hedge, God, and he'll curse you. Well, God says, I'll tell you what, Satan, you go ahead and do it, but you can't kill him. And there's the story and how it begins. Why would God allow this? Why does God allow our suffering? We ask that question all the time. Why is this happening to me, Lord? Well, we're going to answer that. Here's Job. God spared nothing. Satan took over. His body was covered with awful sores. His friends accused him of some unknown sin, since it was an important piece of Old Testament theology that suffering was a byproduct of sin. I'm not doing good this morning. Maybe they could hear that. Maybe they could.
I could hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, on my phone.
Give them a little clearer voice there.
I didn't even notice, so.
All right. Job was covered with sores, and his friends accused him of some unknown sin. Have you ever been accused of something? Well, you must have done something to cause this. What did you do? But Job knew he had not committed any sin. God knew that also, because he said so. And yet there was God allowing it to happen. Desperately holding on. Job sitting on a pile of ashes, scraping his sores, listening to his friends who were trying to concoct an understandable reason for Job's demise. If that describes your life, only you know. Whatever that problem may be, there's a battle going on, and you're not sure that you can endure. At least it feels that way sometimes. What is the secret to holding on? When you are down to your last shred of hope, when there's no longer enough rope to make a knot to hold on to? Where do you find help at such times? Now, you've heard this before. It's a very simple answer to the question, but it's only very simple if you're not in the depths of despair. You're trying to hold on. Those times will come even though you're not in them now. First thing we need to know is learn to live one day at a time. That's an oldie goldie. We've all heard it. And it passes right through our minds when the next thought we have comes and erases it. Live one day at a time. Jesus said, and when he was giving one of his great lessons of life, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. There was a song written once, back in 1974. Mary John Wilkin. You know, I've thought about that a lot. You know, there was men, and it had to be men, that said that their name was John. So they decided that I want a boy. Well, they had a girl, but they still named her John. I mean, I know a lady in Cynthiana named Johnella. Is it Johnella? Yeah, Johnella. And she was named after her dad, John. But this woman was Mary John. And her last name was Wilkin. And in 1974, she was a co-author of a song. And she wrote a whole bunch of songs. In fact, she's in the Country Music Hall of Fame. She was inducted in 1976. But she wrote a song along with another songwriter. Who wrote the song One Day at a Time?
I thought you were going to say a boy named Sue.
Chris Christopherson and Mary John Wilkin wrote this song in 74. And they wrote it at the depths of an issue that were going on in both their lives. And they were at a church meeting, and they gave their lives to Christ. And this is the result of the song. I'm only human. I'm just a man. Help me to believe in what can be and all that I am. Show me the stairway that I have to climb. Lord, for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus. That's all I'm asking of you. Give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. Do you remember when you walked among men? Well, Jesus, you know, if you're looking below, it's worse now than then. Pushing and shoving, crowding my mind. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus. That's all I'm asking of you. Give me the strength to every day what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus. Tomorrow may never be mine. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. That's the lesson. And the first key to us overcoming and holding on is for us to take one day at a time. Sometimes you and I have a tendency to do that too. To let our mind go ahead of what we face in the present. We're always thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. What's going to happen to our country? What's going to happen to our community? What's going to happen to our church? What's going to happen to our finances? What's going to happen to anything you can bring up? We let our mind get ahead. And then we add in the terrible, terrible what ifs. I got a book at home, and it's a book of what ifs. I've read it and read it and read it. Do you know about what ifs? What if a lump is cancerous? What if a business fails? What if our finances go away? What if we have a wreck? What if? We add to today's burdens the what ifs, the burdens of an imagined tomorrow, a tomorrow that may never come, not in the form that we imagine it. We assume, and generally our assumptions are wrong, so we have lost our focus on today's issues by dwelling on what might happen tomorrow. There's no Swedish saying that literally translated means this: there is no cow on the ice. Now, it means there's nothing to worry about. A similar Swedish saying is there's no danger on the roof, which means the same thing. Nothing to worry about. Don't worry about something that may never happen. Although if there's both ice and a cow on your roof, maybe you ought to start to worrying. Pastor James Gordon Gilkey, he wrote a book called You Can Master Life. David Jeremiah quoted him in his book, Slaying the Giants in Your Life. Gilkey had a great illustration for helping us understand how to view challenges and problems that worry us. He said that most of us view our lives as if we're standing in the middle of a circle, and problems and challenges and fears and burdens are surrounding us and pushing in on us. Can anybody relate to that description? He said that it is more accurate to picture your life as an hourglass. There's a large bowl at the top and a large bowl at the bottom. They are connected by a thin tube that allows only one grain of sand to flow through at a time. No matter how busy, how burdened, how hectic our lives seem, we need to focus only on the challenge that is present in the moment. Not on the previous challenges, not on the next challenge. One challenge at a time, one task at a time, one job at a time. Focus on mastering this present moment, and you'll find yourself better equipped for the stresses of the day. It's so easy to ignore Jesus' instructions about worrying. It's so easy to defend our obsession with anxiety. Is that really wrong? Let's say that we could eliminate worry from our lives. Gone. What would you replace it with? Here's a quote from Francis Fillon, a French bishop. He was the archbishop, a poet, a theologian, a writer, and he wrote books. And he lived in the 17th century before typewriter. Fillon wrote, "Don't worry about the future. Worry quenches the work of grace within you. The future belongs to God. He is in charge of all things. Never second guess him. Did you hear that? Don't worry about the future. Worry quenches the work of grace within you. The future belongs to God. He's in charge of all things. Never second guess him. Grace is God's favor shown to those of us who don't deserve it, who cannot earn it, and will never be able to repay it. Chuck Swindoll said that. Think about it. How true is this in your life? Worry quenches the grace within you. How often have you looked back at some difficult times in your life and seen overwhelming evidence that God was in control? Why didn't you see God's mercy and power at work in that moment of suffering? Because you let worry quench the work of grace within you. How can you replace worry with the work of God's grace in your life? You can start by living one day at a time. You see, on one level, Job's problems were much more severe than any that you and I are likely to face. But on the other hand, we complicate our lives by adding dread about tomorrow to today's concerns. So we may not actually cope as well as Job did because we do that. Let go of tomorrow and enjoy living this moment. Live one day at a time. That's the first key to overcoming and holding on. The second is remember that you are loved. The feeling of being loved is the most critical factor in our ability to function as a whole human being. When we do not feel loved, we do not develop the emotional and psychological resources we need to cope with life's various stresses. In October 2019, Staff Sergeant Philip Gray was deployed to Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Gray knew he would be gone from home for close to a year, and he was concerned for his 7-year-old daughter, Rosie. His absence would be hard on her. So before he left, Gray sat down and wrote 270 notes for his daughter, with instructions for his wife to place the notes in Rosie's lunchbox each day. The notes were simple words of encouragement to Rosie, telling her that she was Supergirl, telling her that she was smart, telling her to run fast in PE class. But little Rosie, to her, every single note added up to one big message. No matter how far away her father seemed to be, his heart was always there with her. He wanted to be sure she knew he loved her. Staff Sergeant Philip Gray returned home August 2020, just 3 days before Rosie's 8th birthday, so he could tell her he loved her in person. The greatest need that we have is to love and to be loved. In the absence of that love, we become stunted emotionally and physically and psychologically. Many of us have an innate sense of dread in our life. In reality, we do not have what the psychologist Erik Erikson, who coined the phrase identity crisis, we do not have what he says, a basic sense of trust. So we grow helpless in the face of adversity, or we panic and do dumb things.
Do we not know? Have we not heard? There is one who loves us so much that he gave his own son in our behalf. Live one day at a time. Recognize that you are loved. And finally, third key, learn how to let go. It's a paradox. Paradox is a self-contradictory statement which turns out to be well-founded or true. The best way to hold on is to let go. That's a paradox. As someone has put it so beautifully, let go and let God. We need to know how to release our worries, our fears, our guilt, our anger, our resentment. And there are times when we need to simply let go. Billy Graham's wife, Ruth, wrote to Christian Today of how Malcolm Muggeridge, who was a scholar, a spy, a journalist, and a social critic. She wrote, at one time, England's chief skeptic and agnostic of the airways, Malcolm Muggeridge, changed. In his latter years, he became a committed follower of Christ. Subsequently, he was invited to speak at a prominent church. Many of the local atheists arrived to heckle Muggeridge as a traitor to their cause. Most of the questions revolved around the issue of why have you let us down? Muggeridge noticed that in the audience was a little boy. He was in a wheelchair and he was struggling to speak. When the boy continued with his contortions, still unable to say what he wanted to, Muggeridge said, "Silence. There is someone who wants to ask me a question, and I will wait and answer it." When the boy managed only to make more agonized motions, Muggeridge stepped forward, put his arm around the boy's shoulder, and said, "Just take it easy, son. It's all right. What is it you want to ask me? I want to hear it, and I will just wait." The boy blurted out, "You say there is a God who loves us." Muggeridge said, "Yes." The world-renowned scholar spoke compassionately to this boy. Then asked the boy, "Why me?" He's in a wheelchair. He can't hardly talk. Why me? A universal question in a time of trying to hold on. Why me? That's a hard question. I'm sure Job asked it many times. The room in which Muggeridge was speaking became silent as a funeral home. Even Muggeridge didn't speak at first, but after thinking through his answer, he said, "If you were fit, if you were well, would you have come to hear me tonight?" The boy shook his head no. After another silence, Muggeridge answered, "God has asked of you a hard thing. But remember, he asked something even harder of Jesus Christ. He died for you. Maybe this was his way of making sure you'd hear of his love and come and put your faith in him." Boy's response was, "Could be." I'm really not sure Malcolm's answer to the boy's question was satisfying. But notice, Job didn't really find an answer to that question either, except to keep holding on to his faith in God. And in the end, he would see that indeed his Redeemer lives. If you read through the Bible or through the pages of human history, you discover that God works through strengths, weaknesses, through wins, through losses, through victories, through heartbreaks. If we could control the future, I'll go back to that question, we would eliminate all frustrations and heartbreaks. But then, we'd also miss out on the opportunities for growth, for faith, for compassion, for overcoming. We would miss out on the grace of God. It is the holding on, enduring, not giving up on God that we see God's power and God's love most clearly. And we learn that we can trust God through every circumstance, even when we cannot see Him. If you were in control, what would you replace it with? Marion Bond West and she wrote a book called Praying for My Life. She's also a Guidepost contributor. And she tells of a time when she felt far away from God. Maybe you know the pain of walking through a season like this. It was the middle of August, a blazing hot day, and she happened to see a dog sitting on a sidewalk outside Applebee's restaurant. Inside the restaurant, she met the dog's owner, a homeless man named Johnny. Johnny's dog was named Cheeseburger, and Johnny could have found another comfortable place to stay at a local homeless shelter, but the shelter didn't accept dogs. Instead, Johnny erected a tent in the woods nearby. He wasn't going anywhere without Cheeseburger. When Marion asked Johnny about his own needs, she was struck by his answer. He said, "Here's the way it works. Every morning, me and Cheeseburger step out of the tent, look up at the sky, and I say, 'Lord, we belong to you. We trust you. Take care of us another day. Thank you.' And then at night when we lie down to sleep, I look up at the stars and say, 'We still trust you, God.'" And he smiled at her. As Marion drove away, she couldn't stop thinking about the deep faith and peace that Johnny radiated. It was an inner peace that had been lacking in her own life. So at the next traffic light, she glanced up at the sky and prayed one simple prayer. "Lord, I belong to you. I trust you. Take care of me another day. Thank you." And she drove away with a fresh sense of peace she hadn't experienced in some time. Job did not have the advantage that you and I have. He didn't have the life and teachings of Jesus to look to. He knew and trusted God, but he did not know how committed God was to his well-being. Only Christ can give us that assurance. Live one day at a time. Remember, there is someone who loves you and upon whom you can cast your burden. Learn the art of releasing your troubles. Let go and let God. The book of Job is a classic in world literature. And it's for many reasons. It deals with the universal problem of human suffering. It brilliantly gives the reader a behind the scenes look at the circumstances of which the main character, Job, is unaware. It is beautifully crafted. It has a surprise at the ending that satisfies both the reader and the main character. But biblical theologians appreciate Job for another reason. Job deals with the vindication of a good God in the face of evil or suffering. Put another way, Job raises the subject of God's sovereignty, God's ability to do whatever he wants according to his holy will and nature. James 1:13. In the book of Job, its namesake struggles with God's silence perhaps as much as his actions. Job endured immense loss and could not understand why God allowed it. In his mind, if suffering was experienced, it had to be deserved. Job was willing to suffer, but was adamant about knowing what he had done to deserve this pain. However, Job's understanding was deficient. He failed to take into account God's sovereignty. That's right. Do we do that? Do we resist the fact, the truth, that God is sovereign and we aren't? What God allowed in Job's life made no earthly sense to Job. God acted sovereignly and secretly, permitting Job to be afflicted for a period of time. Satan thought Job would curse God when his blessings were removed. God wanted to show that Job would remain faithful, and God was right. Then Job's wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept God, our good from God, and not adversity?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Though Job suffered and complained. So there's nothing wrong with you complaining. God understands. He ultimately learned what he had lacked. God is sovereign and good and can be trusted when evidence and distractors suggest otherwise. At the end of the book, when Job has exhausted his attempts to extract from God or his friends the reason for his suffering, God speaks. For 4 chapters, 38 through 41, God reveals to Job that he is sovereign and good, and Job reaches the only conclusion that makes sense for such sovereignty and character. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You ask, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I do not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know." Trust God and hang on when adversity comes to your door. How do you hang on? Prepare ahead of time. Prepare ahead of time what you will do when hard times come, when God is silent, and when it hurts really bad. Say to yourself now, today, no matter what happens to my life, no matter what happens to me, my loved ones, my friends, no matter what happens to this country, this church, no matter what happens, I don't have to make a decision when it happens because I've already decided I trust God. Don't wait till it happens to you, for it will be difficult to decide at that point. Decide now and say it over and over. And when your time comes, you will trust God. Remember, Cheeseburger and Johnny trusted God. They got it. Don't you think we can get it too? Hang on. All God's people said.
Amen.